Find and learn from people who lived it wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from people who lived it.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Hi there, it's Matthew. Welcome to another special edition of Learn from People Who Lived It. If you've ever struggled with religion in your life, today's episode is going to be for you. Danielle Knox did. She grew up LDS, and that presented a set of issues for her later in life, as you will hear. After a messy divorce and some suicidal ideation, Reiki helped her put it back together. She's a Reiki master now, which is exactly where we're going to start on today's episode. So Danielle, first up, welcome to our podcast. Dr. Frank Bavacqua, thank you for being here as well. What is a Reiki master, Danielle?
Being a Reiki master is basically coming to peace with yourself and using healing energy to help you and other people. So it's really like a really calming energy, and it's really gives you a moment to kind of go within and to kind of heal what traumas you might already have going on.
It's been my experience that people who are in that line of work are usually in that line of work because of something deeply personal that happened to them, an experience that they had growing up. And I know that's some of what we're going to uncover. But in this series of our podcast now, we're kind of starting with the hope, and we're kind of starting with the where are we now and how are things in this moment. And so while you've had challenges along the way, how do you declare your life right here and now? What are the words you use to describe it to friends and family?
Oh, I would definitely say hope. I would say peaceful. I would say driven. I would also say love. There's lots of love now.
So Dr. Frank, did you grow up in the church at all? I don't know that about you.
My parents were of the mind, and I think both of my parents grew up with wanting to introduce me and my sister to Catholicism. That's what I grew up Catholic, and then we could kind of make our own choices later. So yeah, if I'm being honest, I feel like I got kind of the best of both worlds, where it was taught to me, but I guess nothing was ever really kind of forced upon me.
What about you, Danielle?
So I just grew up going to church on Sundays and just being very social, but I also just took everyone's word for it. But then there was a point where I was falling into perfectionism a little bit too much and getting a little obsessed with not sinning and being perfect. And that started some triggers for me. And it started an ongoing thing of, well, I've got to do this so I look perfect, so I feel perfect, so I'm not sinning, so I'm like Christ. And for me, it became like an anxiety thing. And it's not all about that, but it's about finding myself and asking questions and believing the answers that I get within myself about what's okay for me. And because I grew up in the church, I ended up not dating for very long and married someone. And we went to church together. We went to the temple together. We were supposed to, get married, have kids, grow them up in the church. And I didn't follow the norm. I tried to follow the norm, but because we weren't upfront and honest about where we were at and how old we were, we grew apart. We ended up breaking up. We had a horrible divorce, and, he had an affair, and it just a cycle. We weren't ready. We didn't date long enough. And I turned to the church after that and tried to get active again. And it's not the church's fault that things didn't work out, but I had this idea in my head, things needed to be perfect. I needed to be the perfect wife. I needed the perfect life. I needed kids, all these things to be happy. And that's not really true. Oh, look at that single divorced girl and wonder why she's divorced and what she did wrong. And, what kind of sins does she have? And I really felt judged. I felt judged a lot. And then I started going to a counselor. And this counselor taught me, you know what, you can go within yourself. You can heal some things and you don't have to be perfect.
If you don't mind, Danielle, I'd like to hit the pause button. I want to bring in Dr. Frank. And I'm going to ask you a question that we've actually never really discussed, Frank. In all these episodes, we've never really discovered or covered this word judgment.
I mean, in order to place judgment either on somebody else or on yourself, you have to have these set of rules in your head or expectations, right? Because you have to compare it to something. Obviously, when you're growing up, you get taught these rules and expectations from other people, and you can either kind of accept them or reject them. And if you internalize them, then you start judging yourself against these things that people have taught you and maybe that you never questioned up until now. I think back to when I was in college and going through kind of a stressful time, handling some different things, sat down with the counselor and you know, the most powerful question that guy ever asked me was, says who? Right? Like I had shared something with him and he said, says who? Like, where did that rule or expectation come from, right? Why are you, you know, judging yourself or what it is that you do or don't do based on, right? Like, where does that come from? Says who?
Yeah, absolutely. So even just like growing up with the idea of needing to be perfect. So another fun story is I grew up with a white bedspread, which is very symbolic of growing up in the church, right? So I had this bedspread. I wasn't allowed to eat on it, not allowed to jump on it, had to pull it down to go to sleep so I don't get it dirty. You know, don't even think about coloring or anything near it. And then like when I got married, I kept bringing up that bedspread and my mom's like, let me just give you that bedspread and you can destroy it. You could do whatever you want to it. And I was like, yes, I want to destroy that bedspread. I want to color all over it and rip it up. And so one of the things I created was a coloring book, and it's a gift that I want to give to you guys. It's a therapy you can use. It's color outside the lines, rip it up, you know, do whatever you want to like not conform and not feel like you have to be perfect. And so that's part of my life now is your interpretation and the view that you want to have.
So, you know, a lot of people have heard about, you know, meditation, right? The idea, almost like trying to get your mind to go blank, right? Thinking about nothing, giving your brain a break. Not a lot of people are good at that, myself included. There are a lot of activities out there that I would consider meditative, meaning you're not thinking about nothing, but you're only thinking about the thing that you're doing. You know, in sports psychology, you may hear the term like flow, meaning you're involved in the thing that you're doing and you're not thinking about anything else. Coloring seems to be someone discovered along the way, like one of those things where if you're doing it and you're kind of thinking about it and focusing on it, you're not thinking about anything else. So there's no end to the list of things that if you're only thinking about that activity, then it kind of falls into that meditative space for you.
Can the three of us discuss something that I think is a sticking point for a lot of people, which is perfectionism? A lot of us want to be perfect. We want to do things the right way. And listen, you could argue that when you don't get it right, you can get yourself into trouble. If you're at a job and it's not perfect or pretty damn close, maybe you lose your job. If you're not good in your relationship, I'm not saying you have to be perfect, but if you don't try to achieve a level, a standard, the relationship might go to. So what is that line between I don't give a shit and perfectionism? Like, you know, where are we in the middle space there? And I'll allow either one of you guys to kind of tee that up.
If you're honest with first be honest with yourself, then you can be honest with other people. Because if you're not being honest with yourself where you're at, you can't really fully be honest for anyone else or really show up. And so part of perfectionism, I think, is just being honest with yourself. Like, it's okay to not be perfect. And you know what? There's beauty in the flaws. There's beauty in the mistakes. There's just so much more you can do. And you don't need to be limited by feeling like you have to be perfect, by obtaining that job you need or the money wealth that you need to be at. It's just find that peacefulness within yourself. And if you work on you, all the other things kind of align.
So I'm going to pick up right where she left off with the idea of kind of working on yourself, right? I guess there's three different ways to approach things. One, you mentioned before, the whole not giving a shit thing. We're operating under the assumption that people give a shit about whatever it is that they're doing and doing it to some level of standard, right? If that's the case, there's kind of two ways to approach things. There's the kind of the outcome results based, which is if I did it perfectly, then I succeeded. If I didn't do it perfectly, then I failed, right? Or there's this, mastery approach that we've learned a whole lot more about lately. This idea of kind of accepting where you are right now at any given point, but it's okay to continue to want to be better than you were yesterday, right? Like you think of like a weight loss journey. you're not going to lose all the weight that you want overnight, right? But if you can do small habits along the way and be proud of yourself each day, eventually you'll get the outcome that you want. So this is never me advocating, there are some people that want to take kind of results and outcomes out of the equation, right? I think of like, sports and gym class where, participation trophies for everybody. It doesn't matter who did better than somebody else. I think a healthy level of competition is just fine, right? So it's not about removing, scores and results and test scores and all that completely, but it's about how do you get there? And most of the time, the healthiest way that you can get there is focusing on small self-improvement habits rather than, judging yourself today against the final outcome. I work with a lot of like resident doctors, resident physicians, and they struggle with that every day because they're kind of in year 1 or year 2 of their journey, comparing themselves to the person, teaching them that's got 20 years on them. And if you make that comparison every single day you will lose, right? But if you compare yourself to who you were and how much you knew a month ago, you can win that comparison every time.
That's great advice. Danielle, the podcast is called Learn from People Who Lived It. And so I want to take an opportunity to do that. And if you might, help out any other women or men who might be listening to our podcast today who have done that thing that you did, which is find themselves in a place where they're going to get a divorce. I'm sure growing up in the church, you had real strong beliefs about what marriage meant and how long you were going to stay in it and fight for it and never get a divorce and all of those things. And then, I remember my sister when she went through her divorce and she had said to me in no uncertain terms, like, God, I kind of like, I feel like I failed. Like I didn't get it right. And I would love for you to help and educate other folks on how you were able to turn that noise down a little bit, because I'm sure it was there, and then ultimately kind of get through into the other side. So let's start with the moment where you're going to get a divorce. That is, you say that word for the very first time to this other person, and now it's real. Now it's going to happen. How are you feeling in that moment?
I was psycho. I'll be honest. I did not want a divorce. I didn't know he had an affair, but all I just heard out of his mouth is, I'm not happy. I don't love you. I want a divorce. And I'm like, how? Like, what happened? Like, I was totally sideswiped. I knew we weren't happy, but I was constantly working on getting to a happier place. Right. We were both 21, in school full time, working full time. How in the hell do you come together? Finances, getting sick, whatever. Like we were young and we were working our asses off trying to make things work, and just life happens. And, like when he said those words, I was devastated. I cried and cried. I got a little psycho. I yelled at him to get out of the house. And he's only one of 2 people that's ever seen me lose my crap. And that was in a moment I lost my crap. I didn't throw anything, but I didn't. I just yelled at him, "You've never seen me mad. You'll see me mad now." And I'm like, "Get out of my house." And then he left, and I didn't look back. I just, fine, this is what's happening. But also I went into a really deep, dark place, suicidal, dark place. Mm-hmm. And like, this was my life. Like I had to make it work. How do you make it work? You can't make it work if 2 people don't want to make it work. But in that moment, I was such deep despair. I had a plan. I was going to end my life. I was done. I was like, I can't get past this. And then, ironically, it became my biggest spiritual moment. I felt love and peace, and I felt angelic and inner guidance to come help me and put their arms around me and say, "You'll be okay. This sucks, but you'll be okay." And the next day I told him to come get the gun out of the house. And from then on, I just kept re-tapping into, I said prayers everywhere I went to just, okay, I'll get through this. You'll get through it. Like, come on, you'll be okay. And there's times driving a car. I mean, when you get into that dark mental place, it's hard. You can't just snap your fingers and get out of it. no, it took a lot of work. I drive and I'd be like, I just don't want to be here. I'm going to drive off this cliff. I don't care. I'm sick of this. This life is hard. I don't like it. And then I would say a little prayer and I'd feel that same comfort and it was like a hug, like a spiritual hug. It's like, it just held me and I start crying. I pull over, cry, a lot of crying. And then like, it wasn't easy for a long time. It was really hard. And it wasn't until I reached out and got some help that I started seeing some patterns and seeing some things I was telling myself that weren't true, like having to be perfect and I'm unlovable and different things that I had to work on. I'm not good enough was a huge one. And that I will definitely tie that one to my upbringing and, not sinning and needing to be perfect. But, you can overcome it. It takes some work and it takes a lot of love. And I've had to realize, like, in my family, there is depression, and how do we go into that and work through it so that I don't spiral into that spiral anymore? And
because it is hard, right? Like if you're somebody who's working on yourself, but the rest of the people around you don't want to work on yourself. Frank and I talk about this all the time. It's like people who try to lose weight, but everybody else in the house still wants to eat ho-hos. It's like, it's going to be so hard to do that. And so did you eventually depress you a little bit more? Did you have to exit certain parts of your environment? Did certain people have to leave?
People don't know how to handle depression. And they don't know how to be there for someone who's handling depression. But I also put on a really good front. So people didn't know I was in as dark of a place that I really was in. And like, I didn't even let my parents know. I didn't let anyone know. I was like, I'm done. I'm checking out. But I recognize that when it's happening to other people now because I've been through it. And I have reached out to people when all of a sudden they get quiet or they seem like they're too happy, when I know deep down something's wrong. And I listen to my intuition and I'm like, hey, let's get together. Let's talk. Let's have a lunch, whatever. Or I'll just call him like, hey, I'm thinking about you. What's going on?
Yeah, I love that. Frank, she said a couple of times now, some version of she listened to herself. And I love that, first and foremost, because it's a skill that we don't tap into enough. We tend to be too concerned about what other people think rather than the voice inside of ourselves in our head. So do you have, Frank, any strategies or anything that's useful to help people tap into that voice a little bit more?
I mean, I think it's one of those things that if we're being real honest, it's always there. Some of us have just gotten really good at either ignoring it or pushing it away in favor of what we think somebody else thinks. That's probably the biggest thing, right? If we're talking about, divorce, right? And we go back to that judgment thing that we talked about before. Like there was probably some sadness for you, right? But there's also this fear of judgment from the outside. So that catch-22 of, do I do what's best for me right now, or do I try to do what other people are going to expect of me? I would argue that everybody experiences both of those thoughts, but we're probably really good at ignoring one over the other. Coming back to what you said before, Matthew, about writing things down. I think once you see words on paper, you can kind of go back and realize, which ones of these are from me or for me, and which ones of these are from or for somebody else. I guess that would probably be the easiest strategy, right? Like get it down on paper, get it outside of your own head. Because I think sometimes stuff gets jumbled up when it's just in there. Get it out on paper at a minimum, and then obviously talking to somebody else sometimes can help clarify that too.
Danielle, you mentioned a couple of moments ago that, you discovered patterns in your life. Would you walk us through a little bit of that, like, so people understand what that means more, and give us a tangible example of a pattern that you used to have in your life that didn't serve you?
Okay. So, like needing to be perfect. And that was a pattern for me. I definitely ended up with a little bit of OCD about that. I don't have extreme, but there is a little, I do little patterns even now. So some things like I would tell myself is I'm not good enough. For me, it was things I would tell myself, the stories that I told myself. And so I had to start recognizing what those stories were, and I needed to counter them with positive affirmations. Or for me, tapping into art was a huge release. That was very therapeutic for me, and I found a lot of self-confidence in artwork. Now, I've done a lot of work with rehabs with the digital agency I used to work with, and a lot of things they teach are like you tapping into some hobby or something for you that you can build some self-esteem with. And for me, it was 100% art, but other people do other things, sports, or they get into like, other things in writing, journaling. For me, I needed an actual therapist to work with to like over 35 years of programming that I needed help with. I couldn't do it by myself. When I looked in the mirror one day and said, hey, I'm not Mormon, what am I? Like, it was an identity crisis. I was like, I don't know. I have to start over. Like, couldn't even conceive what that would look like. And I called my sister and my brother who had already left the church like years ago and asked them, like, what did you do? And they're like, I just stopped going. I didn't even make a huge proclamation about it. I just said, hey, this doesn't resonate. And I was in a place where I was divorced. And at that point, like after I already had tried to make it all work, I was like, it's just not working for me. Mm-hmm. And I said a little prayer about it. I was like, hey, what do I need to do with this? And my answer is like, it's not right for you. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be. And so I was like, all right, okay, cool. I'm going to go do this other thing. And I just tapped into what made me feel good and what strengthened me. And I actually took time to meditate and listen to what my answers could be and just went with them instead of like, I don't know if I could get that answer. I don't know if I'm righteous enough to get that answer. I don't know if I'm worthy enough to get that answer. Why in the hell can't you get your own answers?
Frank, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about as she was talking through that whole experience is oftentimes in our lives, we can make a decision that's good for us that isn't so good for the people in and around us. And that can be the real challenge there is, on some level, all of us want to be right. And so we want to convert everybody. But that's not typically what needs to happen in this space. It's more of like, I'm going to go a different direction. You can keep going. I'll give you this example. I don't drink anymore. I set down alcohol in 2006. I'm not self-righteous about it. If you want to have a beer right next to me, that's okay with me. It doesn't bother me, right? You do you, I'll do me. But when you're walking away from things like the church or, a marriage or a big job, people have their thoughts and people have their opinions. And, you can say all day long, oh, don't care what anybody else thinks. That doesn't work. As far as I can tell, I've tried. And as far as I can tell, I still kind of care what people think. Yeah. And there's a bit of that that's good, but there's some of that that sucks too. So lean into that a little bit.
And you're right. I'll start with that. But like, I think we've all met those people who just kind of have this attitude of like, I'm going to be me, I'm going to do me. And everyone else can F off. But it's like to such an extreme that like, it's hard to even have close relationships with people if you take it to that extent where you never consider anyone else around you except yourself, right? You do step into this like selfish place, which I think a lot of us kind of in the middle fear, right? We don't want to be viewed as selfish, living a life that people around us, if it's going to be detrimental for them or saddening for them. I think back to probably the most obvious example in my own life. So I grew up in Connecticut. All of my family is still there. I came out to Arizona to go to grad school, and so I grew up very Italian, so very close family. And so they were all sad that I moved away. I always kind of thought I was going to move back. After I was done with school, I moved back to Wisconsin for my residency, so I got a little closer. Then I moved back to Virginia for some postdoc training, and I got closer, and my family's like, all right, 1 or 2 more moves, and he'll be back. But I always kind of knew that I wanted to be back in Arizona, and I remember specifically not telling anybody in my family that I was looking for jobs out here, that I was interviewing out here, because I was afraid that their feelings, their influence would cause me to change my mind. And I knew deep down that I didn't want my mind changed. So I went through that entire process, and I didn't actually tell them until I had already like accepted the job, put in my notice in Virginia, like all of the things were in place. And I told them, and they're like, "Oh, we're so happy for you." Like, and I'm like, "Oh, well, that would have been awesome to know."
Right.
But there was obviously that fear that was not going to be the case. And so I think sometimes for me, the strategy was do as much of it as you can, get as far along the path as you can to start feeling comfortable with what you're about to do, and then kind of make the announcement, right? You don't have to like make the announcement up front and invite kind of the criticism or other people's opinions before you do it. Does that make sense?
I think it makes a lot of sense. Danielle, how do you feel about it?
Well, my parents are still active in the church. So, I mean, my brother and sister and I aren't, but I mean, I don't have any hard feelings against the church at all. And I do have friends that are very angry and I'm just like, that's so sad. Like, what I say to myself is, hey, it got me to where I'm at, and it got me through some hard times. Like, I'm grateful I wasn't a party girl in high school and college. And I did go through some hard times because of it, but it did teach me family, community, how to set goals. And I don't harbor any anger. I just say, thanks for the learning. And I'm moving forward from that. And I'm on to other things that matter and make a difference. But I also want to reach out to other people that are similar to me, that have maybe gone through something similar. If you met me in high school, you would have no idea I ever would have left the church, ever. I was like that white bedspread. I was pure. I was totally down the straight line. I wouldn't deter from anything. You hardly even heard me cuss. But now I'm all sorts of naughty.
I wonder if you will speak to this a little bit, Danielle. It's like I was, and I like what you just said about, like, I don't harbor any anger. I'm not upset with them. Like, it's kind of what I said about alcohol a second ago. It's like, you want to have a beer, have a beer. I don't care. And most of us, I think, don't care until it gets infiltrated into our lives. Like, it's fine until it impacts us. And so, do you ever have any messy situations now with like your folks? Does church ever come up, and do they ever go, I don't get it. Why did you walk away? Or are they aware enough not to go there? Well,
no, they will ask questions. My mom will sometimes, I mean, she's in her 70s now, so she'll sometimes like, if you would just go back to church. I'm like, Mom.
Yeah.
But I look at that as a moment to have a conversation and just say, listen, I believe in God. I believe in Christ. It's not, I have fundamental beliefs, okay? Sure. It's just, I don't limit it to a certain thing or a certain box. Just like coloring. I go outside the box now. I see what is beautiful in all things. I've studied different religions, and like, there's beauty in all. And you just have to like open your mind to what could be. And even I've opened my mind in psychedelics even, and just open to a whole new level of what could there be and what options do you have. And that was challenging too, because it's definitely, outside the box in a whole other way, but it's beautiful. And the healing that comes with it it's just something that you have to discover for yourself. You can't just, I can't tell you how to heal yourself. You got to go within yourself and figure that out. But I'm open-minded too. Like if the Savior shows up tomorrow and says, hey, this is the true church, you should go, I might be like, cool, let's go together. I'm going to go rock my tattoos and my cuss words then. Is that okay? Because it's not really the church. It's just people in the church, and people are people, and it's in every religion. And you just have to just say, hey, I'll be my own example, and I get my own answers. And you know what? I hope that you do the same. And I would love to talk about the different answers that you get. Like, let's have a discussion. Let's grow from this. You're not limited to what someone else says in church.
What's blown you away about Reiki? Because I'm fascinated by it.
I've been doing it for so long. So when I initially did Reiki, I went and did the class for myself just so I could be attuned and I could do it for myself.
Okay.
And I ended up having a huge spiritual experience that correlates to not feeling like you have to be perfect.
So what happened? Tell me about this experience as we wrap up.
So I'm sitting there meditating, and I literally feel and hear God, and I'm just like, hey, please forgive me for all these stupid things I've done, and I was like really like burdened by these things, and it was like, you just need to forgive yourself. I've always like, you don't need my forgiveness. You just need to forgive yourself. And I was like, oh, I don't have to go confess all this stuff to all these people that, no, you can have a conversation with God and you can work through it yourself with him. You don't need, part of some of the religions, they want you to do that. You don't need it. You can get your own guidance. You can get your own intuition. You can talk to God whenever you feel like it. You don't have to wait for other people to tell you it's okay or how to do it. And they can't receive revelation for you. It's up to you to get your own answers.
Yeah, that's true. Steve Harvey's got this famous TikTok video that's all over the place where he says, God didn't give your vision to anybody else. He gave it to you. If there's anything I've picked up from you, Danielle, today, it's that you have the ability now to listen to your own gut, intuition, brains, feelings, divine. You have honed in on that ability to say, what does Danielle think?
Mm-hmm. I think it's one step further. It's like now I hear the inner guidance, but now I listen and I trust it. Before I was given guidance and I just wrote it off. I'm not good enough to hear this. This can't be true because I'm not good enough for that. That's not true. Go with your gut instinct. Your first response is normally what's true for you, and trust it. And if you don't trust it at first, keep doing it until you trust it.
What about, Frank, people who have bad guts?
Kind of a funny thought, because there have been people that I have come across who, I guess impulsive is a good word to use, right? Where they have kind of their first thought, their first impulse, every decision they've made has been kind of the first thing that has come to mind. But it hasn't been working out, right? And a lot of times it's because they developed some pattern early on. They have not broken that pattern, and so they keep repeating that pattern with that first thought, that first impulse that comes to mind. And so my advice every single time to those folks is stop doing the first thing that comes to mind. Start doing the second thing that comes to mind. Mm-hmm. Whatever the second thing is, because it will probably be different than the first thing. And maybe that's the one that you should be listening to. For some people, that first thing comes to mind and they ignore it, and then they do the second thing, and that's the wrong choice, right? And for Danielle, it sounds like that was kind of right. Like, listen to that first thing that comes to mind. For some people who listen to that and that's not working out, try the second thing. I've never made it to anybody who needed to go all the way to the third. It's one of the first two.
That's great advice. Well, Danielle, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story and a little bit about what you do. And we're going to put in our show notes the link to get that coloring book so you can get outside the lines and start to take that on as a modality. And it's like everything, right? These are just tools. This is another tool to put in your toolbox to help you out. And if it speaks to you, great. And if it doesn't speak to you, that's probably okay too. The coloring book is free, and so you're not gonna have to invest a ton of money in it. And if it works out for you, great. If it doesn't, that's okay. Can you tell me now? I know you don't have any ill will towards the church, but what is your vantage point now? How are you healthy with it? And maybe a good way to ask that question is to give you an example. Like for me, my religious evolution has taken on a space where when I hear Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, when I hear any of the religious leaders, they all kind of mean the same thing to me. They mean a higher power. They mean somebody who's connected. They mean somebody who's living their life in a righteous way and doing the things unto others as they would like to have done unto them. I mean, you know as well as I do, all of the religions have some very universal truths to them. So what's your religion or your relationship with religion now? And walk me through a little bit of that.
I would say I'm more into spirituality now. I'm not really a part of any organized religion, but I think anything that helps you progress and feel like a good person is helpful. Anything that brings you joy and love, like I think for me, everything comes back to source, but it also comes back to love. Mm-hmm. So whether you believe in Mother Nature or you believe in God, like it doesn't matter. Do you believe in love? Can you transmute through love? Can you change through love? Yes, you can. And you can help others too with love. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
Dr. Frank, anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I can't top that off.
All right. Well, listen, Danielle, thank you very much for your time today. Dr. Frank, thank you very much for your time today. And to everybody, please pass along the notes that we're doing this podcast called Learn from People Who Lived It. It's a great opportunity to learn from somebody who's done the dance before and can really kind of key you in an authentic way to how you can make changes. And I really believe that we did that today. So thanks, guys. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.